About 7 years ago, I was driving the Pennsylvania Turnpike, coming home from a funeral in Ohio. I live in the suburbs of DC. It was pretty late, probably 11:30 or 12, and I saw something hanging off of an upcoming overpass. At first, I thought it was just a box or something that got stuck up there. But then it opened up. What I thought was a box was actually a pair of wings. Inside these wings was the craziest thing I've ever seen. It looked like a deer's or maybe a large greyhound's body, but the face was so long and wide, almost like a horse got stung by a bunch of bees and swole up. The thing that stood out the most to me, and still sends a shiver down my spine, were its eyes. At first I couldn't see the eyes, but when my headlights hit it, the eye shine was fire engine red. I saw all of this in just about 20 seconds as I approached the overpass. As soon as my brain registered what I was seeing, I floored it. I was in a 97 V8 T-Bird, so the pickup left nothing to be desired. But I was pretty scared, and I hit over 100 miles per hour before the car started shaking and I had to slow down a little bit. I watched my rear view to see if this thing was chasing me, but either it couldn't keep up or just didn't care to come after me at all. A few weeks later, I saw the Monster Quest episode on the Jersey Devil, and I started having flashbacks. It was when they showed the sculpture of what had been described to the artist. It was so close. I still refuse to drive the Pennsylvania Turnpike at night. We travel that stretch every year. I stay an extra day and face traffic just to avoid being caught at nighttime on that road. When I was 13, I was on an ATV with my two older sisters, one 15 and the other 18. We were going to my grandma's, which was less than 2 kilometers away from my parents' place. We were traveling through our fields, but on the way I suggested we go around the fence so we didn't have to open any gates. It was pretty much the same path, just a bit off to the side. We had gates because this was our pasture for the cows. As we got to the middle of the field, we all noticed something sitting on top of the hill that we were about to climb. On top of this hill, we had a somewhat big pile of rocks from working the fields a long time ago. We slowed to a crawl because it looked human. We thought at first maybe a calf had fell and got stuck, or maybe it was my uncle who looked after all the cattle. But this thing was sitting weird, kinda like how Spider-Man perches over buildings. As we were sitting there, trying to figure out what we were seeing, this thing slowly stood up, and my heart sank. Its arms were long, and I mean grossly long. I screamed to a stop and instantly jumped from the front of the ATV to the driver, replacing my sister. As we were switching, this thing started running at us. Its arms were swaying back and forth like a normal runner, but because of how long its arms were, it just looked so off. You would think it would have ran on the long arms the way they were, but it didn't. It was moving really fast. I turned the ATV around and shot off straight through the field. My sisters were screaming that it was still coming, but I honestly couldn't look back at this thing, and I told them not to look back. We rounded the corner, and that's the last we seen it. As we got home, I crashed the ATV into the deck, trying to get in as fast as we could. We were so scared that my parents actually believed us. They called the whole family to warn if it was a trespasser. They said Nobody seen anything or anyone in the fields. This thing was just so weird. It was tall and skinny. It wore no clothes. Just a body that we could see, grayish color. The head wasn't shaped like a human's. It was thin and small. We were about 30 to 40 meters from this thing. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I was RV camping with my Irish wolfhound Marty last summer. We were in an old camping ground outside of Naples, Florida. Marty wanted out around 10 p.m. that night. Not long after I let him out, I heard a loud yelp coming from the swamp. I immediately flooded the area with my handheld spotlight, calling out to Marty. That's when I saw an unusual creature with eyes that glowed brilliant orange. The creature was yellowish brown, 2.5 feet tall, bipedal, with several foot-long spines on the back. It was hunched over Marty, sucking blood out of his neck. When it seen me, it screeched and ran off. Marty's neck had 2 fang marks as he lay lifeless. I heard another scream nearby, so I picked up Marty's body and headed home to the 24-hour vet. The vet said he had never seen this before and confirmed that Marty had been drained of blood. He mentioned the Chupacabras from his home in Puerto Rico, but said he had never seen one and thought it was only a myth until that night. The story I'm going to tell needs a little foundation. I was 15 the year this happened. I'm Native American and I live in northern Nevada in a rural place. I grew up near animals and the outdoors, and I was a Boy Scout, so I know how to identify most of Nevada and Idaho's wildlife. But this story I'm going to tell you just ruined the outdoors for me. Every time I go camping or hunting, I think of this. Every time I smell garbage or a skunk. Well, when this happened, I was hunting with my brother, my 2 uncles, and my dad. We were going on a 3-night hunting trip. Where we were going had rivers, valleys, canyons, cliffs, and forests. Where we were camping was on the edge of the woods in a valley, and it was our annual campsite. There was a river that cut through the middle of this valley and ran into a natural lake that held trout, bass, and whitefish. When we had nothing to do, we'd spend our time swimming or fishing. The water was cool and clear and attracted a lot of wildlife. I once watched a mountain lion and her cub drink from the water. I had heard all these stories about mountain lion attacks, but normally they are timid and shy. It was the second evening when we were sitting by the camp joking and laughing, when we were hit in the face with a putrid odor. It smelled like a garbage dump on a hot day. My uncle said in a scared and very serious tone, "Let's get into the camper." I just did what he said and laid down and went to sleep. It must have been around 1:30 in the morning when I woke up to our trailer rocking and the same odor that I smelled earlier. I was pretty scared and very confused. At first I thought it was a cow that was pushing its head against the side of the trailer. Then the thought of the look on my uncle's face sent chills down my spine. I tried to go back to sleep when I heard footsteps on the roof of the camper. I needed to use the bathroom, so I grabbed my .22 and slowly opened the door and glanced around for a little bit. I took off for the side of the camper when I stopped and looked at the roof of it. There was a black figure that was crouched down and staring at me with red glowing eyes. I was scared to death, so I fired around in the air to scare it off. It hopped from the position onto the ground and bolted for the tree line. When it got there, it looked back at me and let out the ugliest, most blood-curdling cry I've ever heard. I hope I never hear that cry again. I still go hunting in those woods from time to time, but I've never went over near that spot again. When I was younger, 16 or 17 I think, I had an encounter with something strange in the forests in Wisconsin. The background on me is that I'm 6'4" and athletic. I'm a hunter, camper, and martial artist, generally a survivalist. But I was naive and didn't give nature the proper level of respect and basically was a cocky teenager who felt invincible. Our cabin had been on Long Lake. The whole area is forested for the most part. I was there on vacation with my cousin and grandparents. It was a nice hot summer day and we had decided to play airsoft. I took airsoft very seriously. I wore a full BDU Woodland with a camouflage mask, even though my cousin just wore jeans and a t-shirt. We had a battle which I took into the woods where I felt comfortable. We were about 150 meters into the forest when we stopped. I decided to tease my cousin. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched," jokingly. Unfortunately, it turned out to not be much of a joke, because I immediately noticed that the woods were dead quiet, which only happens when a large predator is around. I went on edge very quickly. Next, the feeling of being watched hit so hard I started scanning the surrounding area. Then I saw it. The whitish teeth gave it away. What I saw was at the edge of a clearing about 40 meters from us, crouched and holding onto a tree with its left hand. It was panting and watching us with its ears up. It had reddish-brown fur and looked very canine. In my head, it instantly clicked as a werewolf. I told my cousin that we have to go, and he bolted. I still had my eyes on it when my cousin started sprinting. The creature charged. It ran on two legs for maybe 10 feet, then dropped down to all fours. I turned and sprinted after that. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind us the whole while we were running. Once back at the cabin, we discussed it, and it's still a little unclear if my cousin got a good look at it. I told him I thought it was a bear to not freak him out, but I know bears, and it definitely wasn't one. I started doing research on these things after my encounter, which brought me to many Dogman-related sites. What I saw seems to coincide with other people's sightings. I'm now far better about respecting nature and am extremely cautious when in the forest. If I go into nature alone, I'm always armed. But I prefer not to be alone, and I, like all of you, should always trust your senses.